Homesteads and Homeschools is part of the Liberty Hippie Podcast Network. If you like what we do, be sure to check out This Week in Liberpods, Peace Freaks, Cannabis Heals Me, and Free Market's Green Earth. We're living proof that libertarian doesn't mean washed up Republican.
What's up? Welcome back. Welcome back again every week. I think I'll just open this up with the same thing every week. Make it easier on myself than trying to think of something new to say. I'm your host, the Liberty Hippie, here with you for week number 90, episode number 90, I guess. Probably about the same number of weeks. I don't know, but yeah, that means you can find the show notes at homesteadsandhomeschools.com/090. My guest this week, I heard him a couple weeks ago on the Lines of Liberty, Mr. Don De Angelo, and he's a teacher out there in San Diego, and he's been at it for a while, and he has done a pretty darn good job of it as well. So I thought, why not have him on to talk about the school systems, right? To talk about the structure that the state has set up for school and what that looks like, and maybe some of its failings, and some of his thoughts on it. And really, he's seen a lot, he's thought about it a lot, and he's got a lot of good things to say. And I think they're good for everyone to listen and hear. And he makes some valid points about homeschooling and some things to think about as you go forward and as your kids get older and require a little more depth of knowledge in certain fields. I encourage you all to stick around and listen, because it's a good one. So let's go plant those liberty seeds with my guest, Mr. Don De Angelo.
The first thing I met was a fly with a buzz and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain.
My guest today is Mr. Don De Angelo. He's out there in San Diego. He's he does a multitude of things. He's here today mostly because he's a teacher, but I don't know. I'll let him kind of introduce himself here. Anyway, thank you, Don, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is awesome.
All right, so we'll start with your teaching there. So you're a teacher out there. Did you go to public school as a kid? Were you homeschooled as a kid? What was that experience?
I was in a public school. It was a central school. So I'm actually originally from New York, upstate New York. So I went to the same building complex for K through 12. That's how small. So it was, I graduated in a class of 133 students, and that's still the largest graduating class of my school. So that'll tell you how big it was. And then from there, I went to the University of Delaware. Well, actually, I went to college for a semester and was just a complete failure at it, dropped out for 2 years, and then went back to school. And that's when I went to the University of Delaware.
Okay. When you started going to college, was teaching on your mind then?
No, not at all. When I had first of all, I didn't really want to go to college at first, which was probably why the first semester was not a success. But I had been an exchange student in high school, and I I was international relations, because I thought about going into either international law or international business.
Okay. So how far along the road then, after you get done with college, did teaching become an interest?
So this is where failure can sometimes point you in good directions, I guess. So back in those old days in the 80s, there were really just a handful of schools that did international law, and their grade point average requirements were high. And I was putting myself through college, and so I was working full time while I went to school full time. And it was just,
Yeah.
So it was just one of those things. And so I shifted more towards academia. So when I graduated with my bachelor's, I was dating a woman who was from Connecticut and decided to follow her to Connecticut and was just looking for work because I pretty much knew I had to go to grad school. So I figured I just needed a job that I could do that. And there was a teaching position that I could take. And I sort of stumbled into it. So I started teaching in Connecticut for 2 years.
Okay.
Assuming that I was going to go to grad school.
All right. Now, back in those old days, as you called them, did you what did you need to teach? Because I know now it's like, you got to have a master's, you got to have a certificate from the state, and all this stuff, right? Was it the same way back then, but to a lesser degree, or?
No, it was, but because I taught at a Catholic school, I did not have to meet those same standards. I did not have to get a certification. So I was hired because I had the academic background for the subjects that I was going to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And so I taught for 2 years there without a credential, but I made substantially less money than a public school teacher in Connecticut. So
yeah, that's something I know, because I used to teach for a minute, and that was like one of the things, you didn't need all the credentials to do, your private schools, but at the same time, the pay cut on an already low salary was substantial. So
my first annual salary was $16,600. So that was my first year of teaching. So yeah, I bartended, I worked in the catering business. So I had to hustle.
Gotta make it work. So you did you enjoy it? Was it something that you just kind of fell in love with as you were starting, or?
Yeah, well, obviously I didn't fall in love with the salary, but I liked the work, but that idea of having to get the credential and going for, additional coursework and all this other stuff, I was already pretty heavily in debt for my bachelor's degree. And in fact, I got accepted to American University for a master's program, and I had to walk away from it because I couldn't get enough
funding,
scholarship money to do it. And I just couldn't afford taking on more debt. So when I got laid off after my second year, I got laid off because of low enrollment. I was the last one hired, so I was the first one fired. And so I decided to go into corporate work. So I went back to Delaware, and I got a job with Chase Manhattan Bank. And then I spent the next 5.5 years with Chase. And so, tried to switch gears and go back to my original international business thing.
All right. And I guess you ended up in California back in the school system, sort of.
Well, so what had happened was I worked in Delaware, and then I was transferred to New York City. I lived there for 2 years working for Chase. At one point, I was like in the corporate headquarters at Chase Plaza in Wall Street. And then I just kind of got sick of being in the winter and all this other stuff. And I just one day was like, why am I here? I'm single. I don't have any reason, it just doesn't matter. And I had never been to California before. And I kept hearing about how the weather was so awesome in San Diego. And I just picked up and I moved. And luckily, I was able to get a job here with Chase again. So I quit, came here, got rehired. And then worked for 2 years while I got my master's degree. It was a bizarre thing, actually. I started working on a what would you call it? Kind of like an internship, a paid internship. And the boss really liked my work, and she was like, "Hey, there's a position open. Will you apply for it?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I'm here to get my state residency so I can get a master's." And she goes, "Well, what if I paid for your master's?" And I was like, I'm in. So, and that's what I did. And then I ended up getting laid off from Chase in 1995. And then I was basically out of work doing odd jobs just to stay afloat until I got hired at my current position in 1996.
Okay. So you've been there a little.
That's why I went back to teaching.
How was it going back to teaching? Was that one of those like, you
It was twofold, actually. On the one respect, after working in corporate America, where you literally only got 2 weeks of vacation a year, and you were always in a suit, and you were always doing this, and you were always, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and the 60 to 70 hour work weeks and all the rest of it. So on one level, I found going back to the classroom so refreshing, because it was so much more liberation for you, because you're allowed to be creative, and your classroom's your classroom, and you can kind of run it. You don't have to worry about somebody directing you what you do. But at the same time, I realized that if I was going to stay in that career, I was going to have to get a credential, which meant going through the hoops, and I wasn't really sure that was going to work. But again, it was a Catholic school, and as a practicing Catholic, that was really nice to be in an environment where it was okay to pray. It was okay to talk about God. It was, it's a very unusual world when you think about it, that you're teaching history, but then you have to tiptoe around all these historical truths and realities because it's a public school. And so I just got to avoid all of that, so, nice.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I'm from upstate New York myself, and we moved down here to Georgia, and the amount of God that's in the public school, and they'll all like kind of say things. They'll say like a prayer before, like a blessing before lunch or whatever in the cafeteria, and all these little things that are nobody bats an eye at. It's just like the normal way of things. But I just imagine what would happen if somebody tried to do that, like in New York, be all over.
Oh,
but
yeah. Or California, they would make a federal case out of it. It's unreal.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, because you said that one of the things about having your classroom was not having somebody looking over your shoulder, right? Your classroom is your classroom. And I know the parochial schools, you kind of have a little bit more leeway in that. Do you still have that sort of leeway? Was that something that has, how's that aged?
Yeah, well, I've probably aged more than it has, but it's, I would put it more like this: in a private school or Christian school, religious school environment, you have the curriculum, but it has to serve a higher purpose. So you are given the state requirements, because every kid has to follow those in order to get that diploma. But then you have permission, basically, to open up the conversation and the narrative in a way that encompasses those things. And I'm not saying that it becomes sort of like a religious class, just that it's okay for me to explain how Thanksgiving was quite literally a holiday of praise to God for the fact that people had survived a harrowing amount of death and pestilence, and I don't have to tiptoe around that, and I don't have to apologize for it, and I don't have to worry about a parent getting all bent out of shape because I happen to mention the fact that American culture has a very strong Protestant Christian ethic to it. That's just the way it is. As a Roman Catholic, I can talk about how historically that was very detrimental to Catholics who came to America, because they were very prejudiced against. It's still a very heavy prejudice that exists in America. But in a Catholic classroom, we could talk about the fact that Christian biblical norms were the structural foundation to a lot of social constructs, and not have to feel like somebody's going to come over my shoulder and just be like, oh, no, wait a minute, you need to censor that because you don't want to offend, so-and-so. And, and so, it's just nice.
Yeah. And it is interesting to think about it from that sort of point of view, right? That this sort of thing, whether you believe in it or not, is so embedded in history, and you're kind of saddled a little bit with it. You can't get into it, you're just tethered in and
well, and I'll give you a really good example from U.S. history. So in the from about 1790s up until the 1830s, there was a major religious revival that's referred to as the Second Great Awakening. And it's Protestant, very Protestant, and it leads to the creation of what we refer to as evangelical Protestantism, and you know, literally across the entire United States at the time. And when you cover it in textbooks that are, you know, for the most part written by Marxists, it's couched in a sort of what I refer to as the science of other. You describe it as if it's some sort of alien thing that has been imposed on society and has to be understood. And so I don't teach it that way. I teach it more along the lines of what was the message, what was that biblical message that was being, advanced and proselytized. And when you do that, there's a whole series of social reform movements that start at around that same time. Every one of them was led by people from this Second Great Awakening movement. So when people sit there and talk about what we today call the quote unquote liberal agenda, which is, racial issues and women's rights and all this other stuff, those all came from reformers who were educated, if you will, and trained in this Second Great Awakening phenomena. So to try to separate God from that conversation is ahistorical. It's not accurate. But more importantly, it raises children to think that you either have religion or you have reform. And that's not what you should be teaching people. I don't care if a child wants to grow up and decide that they don't want to be religious or they don't want to believe in God or any of that. I have no qualms with that at all. But as an educator, I feel it's important to let's be straightforward. This was a nominal religious revival. It spread across the entire United States. Everyone was affected by it, even if they didn't embrace it. And so, for instance, the abolitionist movement that springs out at that time period, Lyman Beecher, who was a major evangelical pastor, he was going town to town. He made freeing slaves part of a conversion process. In other words, if you were going to embrace Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you had to be against slavery. Now, that's a direct Christian narrative, and so there are a lot of books that don't even have Lyman Beecher in it. And yet Lyman Beecher's daughter was Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. And his daughter, Catherine Beecher, was a leading feminist in her time.
It's interesting that I haven't really thought about it from that point of view necessarily, but I think when you try to separate it like that, like it almost undermines any future progress that you could make with these things. Really understanding it, all you understand is part of it, and you can't build a car if all you know how to do is make a wheel roll. Right. But
and by the way, it also happens on the right. So when the sort of like Christian conservatives get that same narrative, so what happens? They grow up with resentment because they see that here's this religious movement off in isolation and sort of separated apart from the rest of the narrative, and they grow up to think, well, that's different. And it's like, no, you're a part of that. Your theology is a part of that. And if you taught it that way, I think you could find moments where the two sides could come together to find the common ground.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's yeah. Do you see colleagues taking the same sort of perspective, that have the same sort of idea on history? Are you kind of on your own, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, everybody's very different. I shouldn't make a generalization like it. Yeah. I feel like everybody tries to incorporate their sense of faith and their understanding of their own faith journey into their instruction. And so everybody has to go where they're most comfortable, because teenagers know when you're faking it.
Yes, they do.
And, if you try to push a narrative that they know you're just squawking, they're not going to buy it, and it makes the classroom environment incredibly tense. So you go with what you know.
I've been there. trying to teach some of those things that they tell you have to teach, and I just I don't have the buy-in, and not there. But now, how much interaction do you have with the public school system?
I have very little. I have friends that are teachers in the public schools, but to be quite honest, I avoid them like the plague. In California, there are pockets of unbelievable excellence, but on the whole, California is something like 47th out of 50 in terms of how well they're educating students. There's an unbelievable control here by the teachers' unions. They have unbelievable political power in California. And so there are school districts that haven't even started yet because the teachers just simply refuse to go to the classroom. And they're using COVID as, their mask, if you will. And, they're basically getting paid to stay home. And, it's as opposed to my school, which is doing a hybrid model, and we just finished half of our semester already. We're already halfway through the fall.
Really?
Yeah, because we started in August, and we said we're just going to go. We're just going to, put our trust in the divine, and we clean like crazy. We scrub everything like crazy. Everybody wears a mask and social distancing. But we've had one case of right, but so California is in a particularly bad space. And so I tried to avoid the public school thing because it's like the third rail. I mean, you touch it, you die. I mean, it's just,
Do you see many kids coming from the public school into your school?
We had a mad rush. So just to give you an idea of just how dysfunctional it is. So when we finished last year, when we finished in June, the announcement at the time was that once this surge ended, that schools would be allowed to prepare for the fall. And so my school spent over $500,000 on new equipment for the air system, for cleaning materials for the classrooms, for other types of PPE in order to be ready to open fully in August. Then in July, July, right? Not even, a little over a month before classes start. The governor on his own decided that it was too risky, and he closed the schools, but he only closed the public schools.
Okay.
And so we announced that we were going to go forward. We were going to implement all of our $500,000, which, by the way, $500,000 took a lot of money from needy kids who try to get a parochial education. But we did that. And guess what? The moment we announced that we were going to be open, there was a floodgate of phone calls from public school parents wanting to send their kids to our school.
That's awesome.
2 days later, the governor went on and clarified that he meant all schools, including private and parochial schools.
Okay.
So apparently the unions got on the phone and said, don't you dare let those private schools stay open because we'll be out of business. So, here we go, nanny state government coming in and saying, we're going to save all of you. We're going to save your lives by keeping you out of school. There's no science to back that up. And there's just absolutely nothing but arbitrary power involved there. It's very, very frustrating. So then he changed his mind and said we could go online. You know what I mean? This whole thing, it's just been absolutely insane. It's the same kind of logic that says that if you go to a bar, you're going to get COVID, but if you get a beer and $5 worth of food, you won't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's finally getting to me. I'm finally just like, I mean, I was over it in the beginning, but I'm finally just like really over it now. Like, man,
Yeah.
but
And here's the real danger, Ben. The danger is we have so terrified children. We have so terrified young people that even when I have half my kids in my classroom, right? In other words, the other half are on Zoom and half of them are literally in the classroom. They don't talk to each other.
yeah,
How are these kids going to be raised? How are they going to grow up to be socially stable people when they literally see other people as potential killers because of their breath?
yeah. The social implications of this whole thing and just I know some kids, my children have friends, and I know some that like, and granted they're, it's a little bit of hyperbole, but like half the people in the world are going to die from this, have already died from this, whatever. Like these, astronomical numbers, and like, even to like exaggerate that much is, your base that you're exaggerating off of is immensely out of proportion. And it's scary. It's scary.
Well, and we're teaching our kids to be irrational. We're teaching our kids to let fear dictate how they conduct their lives. And that has been the opposite of why I teach. The whole reason for being a teacher is to inculcate into children that fear should never be a motivator. You should engage yourself into knowing and to thinking and then deciding, right? And it's just, you can't, I'm 57. I have an autoimmune disorder. And so I am a more vulnerable person, right? I'm more likely to get sick. And if I get sick, I'm more likely to get really sick, right? But I can go and I can look at the numbers and I can see that 99% of people who are infected will have no fear of dying whatsoever. I then have to look at my choices and decide. I mitigate the risk by saying I will wear a mask whenever I'm in an environment where I can't socially distance and I don't know who these people are and I don't know where they've been and all the rest of it. I make that choice, but I don't stop living my life, because if I do that, then I've allowed fear to dictate my own level of happiness. And we're not teaching this to children now. We're teaching them to be afraid, to make their decisions based on fear. And it's just, fear leads to more government, right? Fear is how governments get you to give up more of your freedom.
Yeah, I've seen it time and again
Yep.
this year, past year. But
and that's why so many people are homeschooling now.
Yeah, and I think there has been a number of people that have, and I think we're still there's people homeschooling and there's people doing like the like the online homeschool thing. It's not quite homeschool, but we'll call it that way. And if that's the step that you need to take,
Well, my hope is that when parents are working with their kids online for their curriculum, I'm hoping that parents will really start looking at the curriculum.
I think
start reading the materials that their kids are being given and really start to scrutinize what the public schools are trying to quote unquote teach your kids.
I think I know I've spoken to some people that have spoke to that, but also too, I think the amount of busy work, the amount of why is this taking 6 hours a day? Why, you just, whatever you just did there, why does it take that long? So it will be interesting to see how it all pans out with everything. And, you consider the size of schools and everything that they are, the union, how big the union is, what's going to happen to that? Cause that's, it's a big fish to fry.
Oh yeah. Very big fish.
Well, I'm kind of wondering what would your ideal school system look like? I mean, like if public schools obviously aren't working. They haven't been working for the last, I don't know how many years. But what are your thoughts on that?
So, I'm actually working part-time this year so that I could focus on some other stuff. I just published one book in January and I'm working on another one now that I hope to have published next January, if not soon after. But the book that I've started researching on is about education. And here's the the key thing. Education needs to change in the sense that it should respect the learner wherever the learner happens to be. What we've done really in the past, I would say 20 years, is we've tried to shove every single child into one path, which is a college-based path that, in my opinion, results in a lot of bad college and in a lot of very disgruntled graduates of college. You can give somebody a degree in education and they could be a horrible teacher. So now what? You've got $40,000, $50,000 worth of debt and you can't get a job as a teacher. Yay. And that's all been done, by the way, to improve that person's self-esteem. It wasn't because there was any kind of data that backed it up. There was no demand for this many people to graduate from college. This was a false demand created by a government that decided that the only way that a child will feel good about themselves is if they get into college and get a degree.
Right.
And now that's horrible, because what if you're in 7th grade and you just don't want to do it, or you can't? You don't have that academic drive and that academic, propensity. You are now going to spend the next 5 years of your life being told that you're essentially not as good as everyone else. Whereas, you and I grew up in New York, and in New York, they had the BOCES program where, you could go into vocational training the last 2 years of school.
I remember I when I was teaching, there was a kid, he's just a total gearhead, and that's really what he should have done. But, got pushed in to go to college, and he was done after a year, and who knows how much debt he has, and who knows how much time and money he could have saved if he had just gone into a trade like that. And there was nothing wrong with that. He loved it. He was good at it. And why not? How many kids does that happen to,
Exactly right. And I'll say to, and I'm in a college prep school, by the way, so you understand, but, I'll say to students all the time, if you don't think being a plumber is a lucrative reality, wait until your garbage disposal breaks down on Thanksgiving and then tell me how much a plumber can make. Because I had to do that once, and it was $100 just for them to come to my house.
Mm-hmm.
So don't denigrate these things. And more importantly, these are jobs that can't be outsourced to India or China or other places, right? When you need a mechanic, he has to physically be here. When your air conditioning breaks down, the guy has to physically come to your house, right? You can't call in or do a Zoom call with, some guy in South, India, and have him walk you through it, right? I mean, tech support will not help you when your heater's broken.
Right.
This is the kind of stuff that, we could be setting children up for perfectly fine middle-class lifestyles with virtually no debt whatsoever to start their lives. And we're not doing that because we've decided, right, in all of our infinite wisdom, that we know what's best for all of them. And it's the same thing. So in Germany and most of Europe, by the way, they have the 3-track educational system. There's regular high school, and that's kind of for people with low skills or people who are just not very motivated, right? Mm-hmm. And even for those students, by the time they leave high school at 18, they've lined up jobs for them, whether it's being like a clerk at a store or helping out at a hospital or doing other things. They've already been moved into these jobs, right? And the other is the vocational track, like we talked about. And the third is the academic, which is an additional year of high school. They actually go until they're 19. And they're fed right through the system. But it is grueling. Our kids would not be able to do it. My college prep students would really struggle.
Yeah.
But when you go to college, you don't do all this general education stuff. You go right into your degree. It's 3 years. And it's dog eat dog. If you don't make it, goodbye. There's just none of that tomfoolery in it. And they even control how many people can be in which majors based on what they perceive to be the future demand of that career.
Interesting.
Yeah. But this is where they're wrong. The European system's wrong because there's no what I call forgiveness. So let's say, for instance, in most of the European models, there's a battery of exams that are given to children when they're in junior high school. And that determines which track you go on. So what that means is, if you were me in 7th grade and a total squirrel,
yeah,
and suffering from a bout of HD80, PDQ, as whatever, and academics was kind of like the last thing on your agenda, you're going to be put into that one track, and you never get out of it. It means it's so, a lot of, like how Bernie Sanders talked about, we need to be more like Europe where college was free. I always tell it when I talk to students that you have to define free, right?
Yeah.
First of all, the taxes are incredibly high to pay for that free college. But the second thing is, if you don't qualify to go, you can't go to college. It's not about whether you pay or not. You're not going to go.
It's free college for a select few.
That's right. And so the problem with that is there's no ability for somebody to say, get into 9th grade like I did and start to realize, oh, I kind of like this stuff. Oh, I kind of like, languages, So I took 2 years of Latin and got A's, right? But in the German system, that wouldn't have mattered. They would have, first of all, I probably wouldn't even have been given classes in Latin. But it would have been like, okay, well, you want to take a Spanish class? Great, take Spanish, but it's not counting towards anything.
Right.
Well, so Germany, and I know Germany because I was an exchange student there, and the Germans have one of the lowest youth unemployment rates in the world because of this system. But the problem is there's a huge problem when these people hit their 30s and 40s because you hit a wall, because everybody does, right? But for me, because I already have a bachelor's, if all of a sudden I found out I can't do this job and I need to go into a different field, I can go to college and get additional training and go do those things. Well, they can't because they don't have any of the preliminary work necessary to go to college. So now they're screwed. And by the way, they're the ones, if you're following the sort of current history, they're the ones who are against immigration into Europe. Because those people are coming in and taking over jobs that are the only jobs they're qualified to do. And yet they're being, you know what I mean? That. And so the system that I envision for us is what I call tracks and bridges. It's good to track the students because you should go with where they are.
Right.
If a kid's not motivated and doesn't want to learn, pushing him into an AP class is the dumbest thing in the world. And believe me, I see it all the time. And so put them over. But then there should be constant ways for them to jump around and constantly being able to adjust, including, by the way, using community colleges so that when you're older and you finally wake up and realize, wow, minimum wage really sucks. There's a way for you to take a bridge and get into a different path.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that, like being able to move around or getting in sort of some of those tracks, like seems like, I don't know, getting in AP classes, and then that was all you could do. There was no like, maybe I don't want to do this, or maybe I want to do AP this, but not AP math. And it wasn't really an option, it was kind of like, and let's face it. I mean, what high schooler knows like what they're going to do? I mean, like what, like 2%, 5% of like high school kids, like actually, but,
and even, and like, let's say you doubled that. Let's say you said it was 4 or 5%. Out of that 5% that say know exactly what they want to major in and they go in there, I would say almost half of them will change their major. That's the kind of thing that has to happen. And again, right, that's part of this not respecting the learner where they are and instead trying to put them someplace where you think they have to be. And by the way, this isn't just schools. This is parents. Parents today are just really terrible, where they aspire to things that are not based in reality at all, and then essentially blame the teachers and the system for the fact that their kid's struggling.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are you putting your child in a AP course when they have neither the ambition nor the talent? Well, it's because they convince themselves that they'll get into a better school if they take AP and it's on their college resume. It's like, okay. And administrators don't want to fight it because.
I hear. Have you seen more of that in the last?
Yeah. Yeah. It's been easier this year. What's kind of funny is I've noticed that there's an incredibly larger increase of appreciation for teachers this year than there has been in my entire career. Because I think after 4 months of having to teach their kids themselves, they were just like, oh my Lord, I could never do this. So that's been really good. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of parents out there that think that education is supposed to be a, how would I put it? Almost like a concierge service, like you're supposed to go into each of your classes and say, well, now, Timmy's very smart, but, Timmy really doesn't like to do homework. Timmy has a hard time staying focused on his homework. And so he's not always able to get his work done on time. So he needs a little bit of flexibility with that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll wait 2 days and give him a 0. I don't know what to tell you. I'll be flexible. These are the things that, and I don't know where it comes from, to be honest. But it's weird.
I don't know, but I imagine with all the, the participation awards and everybody, all the feel good, and it gets pushed along. And now, that generation, we're having kids, and this is it. My kid doesn't feel good because he's not getting his homework done. He gets a 0. So what can we do to make him feel good? And we don't think about, the further outcomes of that, but.
Yeah. So you have this movement in education right now called restorative justice and restorative academics, where a child could do really horrible things and they don't get expelled. They don't get punished. They have a conversation with their instructor and they decide how they're going to restore the relationship. And then in academics, a kid can simply turn nothing in and still get a 50% as long as they've had a conversation and they understand that, somebody was disrespected or somebody's feelings were hurt. And now we're going to move forward and find out when exactly Timmy might feel comfortable getting his homework done. And so now teachers are literally still collecting homework on the very last day of a grading period, because to give little Timmy a 0 is to permanently harm his self-esteem and
yeah. Oh man, the things we teach them,
I
right?
sit there and I think, what's this child going to do when he really faces genuine struggle, hardship, challenges?
Boss needs a job done.
And Mom and Daddy aren't there. I just don't know how that works.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine I worked for Chase Manhattan Bank for 5.5 years. It was like a very high pressure job that I did. I can't imagine any of my supervisors being okay with me saying, I know that we really had this deadline set, but I'm experiencing a little of anxiety and I'm really feeling bad about this, but I just, I need to communicate that I'm feeling bad and I need some time in order to, I'd be done. There would have been a conversation. There wouldn't have been a restoration of the relationship. It would have been like, goodbye.
Yeah. It's the end of the relationship.
Yay for Marxism.
Hopefully with the homeschooling, we kind of can get on some of that, where you are able to have those conversations and develop that. And, you're coming, like you are with your child, what it is that they excel at, and they have that freedom to decide those things and find those things out.
And so when you're doing a science lesson and you need to understand a certain amount of evolution and your kid's crazy about dinosaurs, you use dinosaurs to get your kid to understand the concept. But a teacher in a classroom of 35 kids can't do that.
Yeah, it's tricky.
So, it's a tricky thing. But the homeschoolers have to be really super careful in that it gets very easy to go to quote unquote alternative materials that may not be the best for measuring ability or giving your child the full information that they need. And so there's these gaps in what they have. And then they end up later, say in college, where they are going to be competing against their peers and all of a sudden realize there are these gaps in their knowledge. That's the other side that you have to be very concerned about with homeschooling.
Yeah. I think that's one of those things that I'm not sure how to come at that quite yet.
I think a good thing to do would be to create resource groups.
Yeah.
And to sit there and say, hey, you know what? So for instance, I had told a friend of mine who homeschools that, look, if you have a pot of kids and they want somebody to come in and do U.S. history stuff, I'll do it.
And you're seeing more of that, I think, with like the little co-ops popping up, little, trading here and there. And I think there's
one in my church.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I go to a Latin mass, Catholic church, and all of the moms, pretty much homeschool for the most part, at least for elementary school. And they're all sharing. In fact, the priests do Latin classes for the kids. Very
cool.
So, no better source for Latin than a priest.
Yeah, right. So. All right. Yeah, and I know, like, because there's tons of resources online, and I think, like, if you want to dial in and figure out, what the state provides and fill some of those holes, you can. And I think, I don't know. Well, we'll see. I haven't quite crossed that bridge yet. We're still 10. 10 is our oldest, so.
I am convinced of one thing. Until millions of parents pull their kids out and homeschool them, the system will not change.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's no incentive for it to change. You're all forced into one way of school. And if you can't afford or can't get a scholarship to go to a school like mine, you're in a sense done. And so until there are really sizable, and maybe this is it, maybe this is the moment that makes it all happen. But until there are sizable numbers of people who are opting out of the public system, it's not going to change. It won't change.
No, and it, hope some things will, but I don't think it will anytime soon. And it's too bad because the kids are the ones that end up getting hurt the most, and then filters onto their kids. So, but
yeah, exactly right.
Before I let you go, I know you mentioned 2 books. One book you have out, and another one hopefully coming out soon, or not. Well, I guess it's October. I guess it is soon.
Yeah, I'm hoping.
I don't even know what month it is anymore.
I give myself about 3 hours of writing time a week to work on this book. So my first book is called The American RE-volution, with RE capitalized -volution. And that's because everybody starts talking about destroying the system or getting rid of the system or changing the system. And it's like, actually, if you take about an hour and read what the system was designed to do, you will A, realize that it's a pretty good system, and B, we're not living under that system. So maybe if we don't have a revolution, but instead have a revolution, we can fix a lot of the problems that we think are insurmountable. And so I go through things like immigration and Social Security and all this other stuff to kind of give what I call a libertarian spin to those. The book I'm working on now is about California, and it's called The Bear Flag Republic, because California has lost its way. California used to be one of the most innovative and open and free states in the Union, which I believe made it the Golden State. And now we're just all living off of that reputation, and it's going downhill pretty fast.
Coast. Yeah.
Yeah. And then my education book is going to be called School Recess, that I hope will be out next year, probably more towards the end of next year. And then the other thing that I would tell any of your listeners, if they're interested, if you go to YouTube and type in Professor De Angelo, I have 2 series of podcasts that are on there, one on early American history and one on modern American history. So if anybody needs resources for their homeschooled students, especially for high school U.S. history classes, there are 32 podcasts on there. There's over 40 hours worth of podcasts. And I also did one on writing skills. So people should definitely feel free to do it. And of course, obviously I benefit from it because if YouTube sees all these people.
Yeah. Are they animated?
No, they're PowerPoints with a voiceover.
Okay.
The PowerPoints have, different pictures and maps and all this other stuff. All of my students use them.
That's awesome. I'll link to all that in the show notes there.
Yeah.
I know earlier I had seen something on YouTube that popped up with, I think it just was De Angelo, but
yeah, you got to be careful because there's a Robin De Angelo that's spelled D-I, and she's the white fragility author, and there is no relation whatsoever between.
Oh man! All right.
So, but yeah, by all means, I welcome everyone to come and get those as much as you can. I'm hoping at some point to do a series on American government as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That would be spectacular. I will put those links in the show notes and I can listen to those myself. So.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
No, Ben, I really appreciate you getting in touch with my
Appreciate it. Hey, back. That was Don. A lot to say. And it was all pretty pertinent stuff. Encourage you guys to go to the show notes and check out his books. Go to his YouTube, check that out as well. There's lots of good information in there, quality information in there, and really just kind of good stuff to know and to share with your kids. I'm looking forward to his other books coming out. Try to remind you guys when they do come out, remind you all out there that he's got something else coming out. Anyway, guys, I think that's it for this week. If you have any ideas for shows, let me know. I got a couple guests coming up that I think you'll like. I hope you like. But it's always good to get feedback and let me know what do you want to hear. I know this week was 2 weeks of homeschooling stuff in a row, but that's how it all landed. I'd gone for 88 weeks, 89 weeks, I guess, of back and forth, but not anymore. Anyway, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing me out. Keep using that Amazon link, homesteadsandhomeschools.com/Amazon. I appreciate it. Anyways, that's it for this week. Get out there, sow those seeds of liberty. We can all reap sheaves of freedom together.
I'm gonna ride us his dream. I'm gonna ride us his dream.